So my name is Brendan Goss. I'm the Senior Innovation and Accelerator Manager in Tangent in Trinity College Dublin. Tangent is the university's Innovation and Entrepreneurship Centre. And together with our panelists today, we're going to have a fairly informal conversation about the built environment, the state it's in, and how climate technology solutions can help reform the built environment and make it more environmentally friendly, reduce the carbon output from the sector itself, and introduce companies, startups or SMEs into the community that we're building in order to effect systemic change as quickly as possible. So introducing my panelists, I've got Ron Imick sitting on his balcony in Spain. Ron is an author, a thought leader, an influencer,
wow, yes,
a futurologist, and an all-round space cadet, it has to be said.
In a good way. In a good way.
In a good way.
Yeah.
An intergalactic thought leader, I suppose we can characterize him as. Also joining me is Aideen O'Hara, who's a director of Sustainability Works, which is a consultancy firm based out of Dublin, which works with a lot of semi-state and private enterprises around getting their sustainability strategies in shape. And also we have Ed Murphy, who is the co-founder and chairperson of GreenTech HQ, which is a new innovation hub in the southeast of Ireland in the town of Enniscorthy. And GreenTech HQ are our partners with Tangent in delivering a built environment climate accelerator program, which we're running in association with Climate Kick from September onwards for the next 7 or 8 months. So folks, welcome. And everybody who's listening, welcome in. Thanks for joining us this lunchtime. We're streaming live from Dublin. And really, we're just going to conduct an informal conversation about what the built environment actually is, how you might define it, what it's responsible for in terms of the damage it's currently creating in terms of carbon output, and how we can mitigate and adapt to those damages and the harm that is being caused. Ron, what would your thought be, or what's your sense of where the built environment is and where it needs to go in terms of sustainability?
Okay, so we know it's one of the largest emitter of carbon, one of the biggest users of water, probably pollutes to a high extent as well. And Aideen would be much better at giving you those stats. But if you look where it is, I think it's going to go. And actually, today I posted something on our LinkedIn group about a concrete levy, where you have to pay 5% extra on concrete. I think the business model that we are currently operating are unsustainable. And if you look at the heat waves in Spain, France, and even there was an article about that skiing in the future is going to be impossible. That very soon, I think business models will have to be calculated at full capital cost at restorative levels, which means that all the water you use, all the carbon that you emit, everything that you take from the earth will have to be taken back at the same level. Then if you accept that as a model, and that's going to take 5 to 10 years, or maybe 15, but it is going to happen, you're going to get penalized as well. Then the only solution that's sustainable is circular. So I think the construction and the built environment will be a completely circular type of business. And then I think construction, particularly because it seems to be a very traditional sector, is ripe for disruption. So I think ultimately circular will be the only choice that you have available to you, maybe with a layer of restorative as well.
Okay. Aideen, what are your thoughts on the sector? And I mean, circularity and the circular economy is obviously a very complex mosaic picture, but how quickly do you think these really critical issues can be addressed?
So maybe just to build first on what Ron has said. So I suppose when we think about sustainability and the built environment, I suppose we have to think about it in a couple of different lenses. We have to think about the fact that we have existing building stock that has been built. Some of it has been built for a few years, but some of it has existed for decades. And that existing building stock, whether it's commercial or residential, needs to reduce the amount of energy it consumes and therefore the amount of carbon it emits. So we need to tackle existing building stock to reduce its carbon emissions. And that's a very difficult to treat sector to be able to do that in a really cost-effective way. So we have to find out solutions to retrofit global building stock, not just building stock in Ireland or in Europe, but global building stock. And I suppose the second part is new build. You know, there are, especially in Europe, we have very high building, very advanced building regulations in terms of new build. So, you know, we certainly are building homes and commercial buildings to have a lower energy consumption or a lower energy demand. But there is a huge opportunity and a huge body of work still to do to, I suppose, build new buildings using more sustainable materials and to build those buildings so they are resistant to the physical effects of climate change. So like flooding, excessive heat. And we have to build those buildings so that they I guess, are very much integrated in the communities and very adaptable for use, because I think we have a tendency when we're building buildings to build them for a singular purpose and not build them to adapt to change. So I suppose we have to think about that built environment and the fact it has one of the largest carbon footprints of all our various commercial or economic activities. And we have to think about it in terms of new build and retrofit. And there's opportunities to, I suppose, innovate and to do more within both of those sectors. And then when we think about, I suppose, new build and even retrofit, we have to think about, well, where the construction process itself, you know, so that's everything from the construction site, you know, how does that happen? We have to think about the operational use of the building and how we can influence that. But actually, one of the biggest things that is beginning to influence the construction and built environment sector right now is a European standard called the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Standard. And that's forcing companies, so like real estate, property owners, large construction companies, to assess their value chain, to understand, well, what environmental impact are we having, not just with our operations, so not just what we're having in our day-to-day operations, but also what impact are we having upstream in the value chain, where we're sourcing concrete from, where we're sourcing kind of trees or for use within the buildings, where are we sourcing iron and steel. So it's forcing all corporate companies to really assess their environmental impact. And that's a game changer. But equally, a lot of those companies are going to need solutions to figure out, well, how do I change my environmental footprint in not just my operations, but also within the value chain. So we're going to need lots of solutions across that whole value chain. And I think that's, on one hand, that's really exciting. It's huge. There's a huge scope of opportunity there. But equally, I suppose, for startups and for SMEs who might be on the call today, it's really important to understand where those companies are at now in terms of needs. Because yes, we do have to think about 5 years into the future and 10 years into the future. But if you've got a proposition, I suppose we need to understand, you know, is that something that our corporate clients like real estate, construction companies need right now, or when is that timeline for them?
Ed, tell us a little bit about how Green Tech HQ is positioning itself then in the context of the type of change and reform that is necessary now, not just within an Irish context, but at a global level as well.
Yeah, thank you, Brendan, and thanks, Ron and Aideen. I can't add too much more to the basics that Ron and Aideen has mentioned, but Green Tech HQ has been set up as Ireland's first sustainability innovation hub, bringing together innovators, bringing together corporates, bringing together investors, bringing together community all to work on the effects of climate change and greenhouse gas emissions. And as both have said before, the built environment is one of the biggest emitters of greenhouse gas emissions, is the biggest, was pretty well of a carbon footprint. And hence, apart from other areas that Green Tech HQ has got involved in, like renewable energy, this we saw as something extremely important to look at the built environment and try to create a center of excellence in Green Tech HQ as for looking at innovation within the area of the built environment. But what I'd like to say for people looking at this, that I'd like to contribute to this project is to create a collaborative space, create a landing place for members to join us on the journey. I'd like to act as a connector with corporates, connector with government, connector with community, and basically provide the potential of a pilot site for people who want to try out different innovations. And whether we use the pilot site in our local town here or in our local county or working with some other municipalities in Ireland and in Europe. So that's effectively what I want to contribute to this, to the party in this accelerator. So yes, we're an innovation center, but it's an innovation center focused on sustainability, climate change, and circularity.
Ron, I was just thinking in terms of the complexity of the industry and the kind of the stakeholder map, if you like, of construction generally. And we're talking about, not in terms of the built environment, we're talking about infrastructure, we're talking about all the pipes, wires, the inflows, the outflows, the waste, et cetera, et cetera. So there's complexity in that in and of itself, and then there's huge complexity in terms of circularity. How do you think we can simplify that message in terms of communicating the need to introduce circularity into the built environment and the need to have the construction industry, if you like, become more accessible to that type of thinking or those types of innovations?
Okay, we have a P-Tot PR deliver some of the sessions that we do. Paul, what's his last name, Aideen? Paul is his name. Great guy. Paul Hayes. And he always talks about that you should future frame your company 2-3 years into the future. And if you want to keep it simple, frame your organizations in a world where circularity will become part of the vendor rating. So next time you want to supply a large contractor, you will have to score on a number of criteria in sustainability, and then see whether you fit now and how you can make sure that you fit in 3 years. And I think it's as simple as that. You can make, and then you need, obviously, but this is classic entrepreneurship. You need to find your niche. Your value proposition need to fit with the clients that you are trying to service, but value proposition and future framing would be what I would, to keep it simple. And Aideen can tell you about how important it is to fit into a value chain, because you're obviously not in isolation from people that supply to you and to others. And that's but yeah, sorry, I'm making it complex again. Future framing and value proposition.
And just to add to that, Brendan, you know, like circularity is already something that any company with over 250 employees now in Europe has to consider. You know, the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive that I mentioned, it's 10 standards, and one of them is circular. And so if you're a construction business or you're like a real estate property group and you have over 250 employees and you have a turnover of 40 million, which, you know, that kind of covers a lot of companies, they have to consider circular economy. But I suppose it's not in isolation. It's considering circular economy as part of a climate consideration, as part of a biodiversity and nature consideration, as part of how they're treating people. So circular, I suppose, is one dimension, but there is a clear standard from Europe saying you need to consider it. And it's going to be part and parcel of how companies have to disclose on their environmental, social, and governance activities. So in terms of simple, it exists. It's in the language that companies are using when they talk about sustainability and ES and G. But I suppose to Ron's point, net zero carbon, circularity, they're all great. But your product and your service has to have a value proposition for the end user and the end customer. And I guess that's what all of these real estate companies, construction companies are looking for. They're looking for solutions, but what is that value proposition for them?
Yeah.
Just to add, I think sometimes I think we shouldn't confuse circularity with ESG. The different things. So circularity is just an element of ESG, and those shouldn't be confused with each other, I think. I think sometimes the tendency to focus too much on the ESG and not enough on the circularity.
I suppose within that then, because you have effectively through this new regulatory environment, then you've got a push and pull influence. But the push is really on the large companies who have to publicly announce and publicly demonstrate that they're paying more than just lip service to sustainability. But what are the opportunities then, Aideen, do you think in that regard? If there is now pressure being exerted on big companies, big public-facing companies, to declare what they're actually doing in a tangible way, from the point of view of integrating circular or sustainable solutions into their value chains, opportunities then for startups, where do you see them?
So if you think about, the flip side of opportunity is risk. For a lot of these companies, that's the first thing they're looking at, and I guess when they're starting to look at the fact that they have to report on 10 standards under the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, and there's lots of metrics and criteria they have to report on. They're viewing them from a risk perspective. But the flip side of all of that is always opportunity. So and if you think about then, the kind of the topics within CSRD where there might be opportunity hotspots. So like reducing carbon is a big one. So we know for kind of construction companies, for them, a big opportunity to reduce carbon is on the construction site itself. How can you move a site to be zero carbon or as close to zero carbon as possible? So that's looking at the whole range of machinery and systems there in terms of how can you produce that in a net zero way. You're looking at embodied carbon and materials is another huge issue that's arising, because to date, most companies have tended to focus on operational emissions, so the emissions directly released through the building through using kind of a heating system or powering equipment in the building. But they also now have to look at the embodied carbon, so the carbon that's inherent in every brick or every piece of steel that's manufactured and used in the building. So there's a huge opportunity there to, I suppose, understand the embodied carbon component of all building materials, but also to find alternative materials that can that have a lower carbon footprint. And I suppose systems that will facilitate a retrofit of building in a more circular way. So how can you reuse materials? How can you design materials? How can you design the building in the first place for a disassembly? So I think we currently design buildings so they're built to last, which is fine. But now we have to think about that adaptive use. So how do we design buildings so that they're adaptive? And if we need to disassemble components or aspects of the building, we can do that easily and reuse and reclaim the materials. So I think there's definitely a huge scope of work there. And that's a mixture of kind of climate and carbon and circularity. And I think the other kind of thing to consider in the built environment world is climate risk. So we know that we're going to have more extreme weather. So in some locations, it's going to be heat. So we're going to have heat islands in cities, in urban areas. And in some locations, it's going to be flooding. So we have to, be better equipped with being able to predict extreme weather, the severity of extreme weather. That's incredibly hard to do, but it's a huge opportunity. Insurance companies, construction firms, property firms are all hungry for that information. And we have to, I suppose, come up with ways of designing our buildings so that we are kind of future-proofing them against some of these extreme events. And that really comes back to principles of design and how you can do it effectively and easily. And I think the other thing with buildings will be, for a long time we've focused on, when we think about biodiversity and nature and buildings, we think about doing a nice green wall and we think that ticks the biodiversity box. Whereas now the construction and built environment sector has to go much further than that when it comes to nature and biodiversity, and they really have to think about nature and biodiversity in their real upstream value chain and how they can have a positive impact on that.
Okay.
So there's definitely lots of things there, and we haven't even gotten into the energy component or the data analytics component or the IoT component, of which there's lots of solutions out there, but there's still kind of room for more to come to the market.
Excellent. Folks, we have a few minutes to go, but I want to encourage you to put any questions you might have into the chat box and we can put them to the panelists. And a quick shout out as well to any startups or SMEs that might be pivoting with solutions for the built environment to consider submitting an application to the built environment Trim Accelerator, which we're running. And I've put the link to the application portal into the chat box as well. Ed, quickly, just in terms of, I think, industry engagement, and this is kind of a critical part of this particular story when we're trying to affect change. Small companies, small independent companies often feel quite isolated or at a loss in terms of the challenges they face with integrating their solutions into this kind of larger systemic environment, with a big construction company or a big development company. How important do you think it is for big companies to communicate or to engage with companies from the kind of startup or independent ecosystem?
Brendan, I don't know about the rest of you, but I actually think this is an enormous challenge. And I do think there's an opportunity for, let's call it an innovation exchange or an innovation coupling of the innovators and the corporates, because and to have or involve a number of corporates in putting out major challenges that they have to deal with all of the challenges that Aideen has mentioned and Ron has mentioned. And certainly that's the part that I would like to play, because I do think sometimes corporates, they struggle themselves in terms of innovation, and by the very nature of the company and how it grows and how it develops its revenues, how it develops as a company. Sometimes innovation gets left behind in those larger companies. So it depends hugely on startups, scale-ups, and innovators. So I think that one of the most important things for this accelerator or any ongoing innovation environment is to engage, to get sponsorship from, certainly get engagement from and involvement from large corporates, who we let them know of the potential of the accelerator, the potential of innovation, and really engage them in, the CSRD that Aideen has mentioned, that the directives that they now need to comply with, and they will know that they actually need innovation. They actually need new companies come along to help them deal with some of the challenges, some of the issues that they have. So I think that innovation exchange is just going to be hugely, hugely important here. And I think in the built environment, it's never been more apparent, because I think the built environment to me, compared to any other sector, has been slow to innovate. They've been very slow to come up to scratch in terms of new building methods, new methods of construction, new methods of energizing their building, new methods of working with the grid, new methods of how they not only energize, but how they store energy. There's lots of innovations to be had within the built environment. I don't think the built environment, the property environment, has been overly innovative. And I just think there's such a long way to go. And I think this is a perfect accelerator at this point in time to pull together corporates, large construction companies, large property owners, pull together with innovators to be able to deal with the challenges that are ahead. But it's a big challenge, by the way, pulling in these corporates and large companies. It is genuinely a big challenge, and something that I think we need to work really hard on to bring them in and get them involved.
Very good. We have a question, Ron, which I'll put to you. Now, it's a potentially very complex question, and it's a question we could probably spend a couple of hours discussing, but
yes.
What are the best strategies for adopting circular business models?
Is that from a company trying to sell your circular solution to others, or as an organization yourself? So as an organization yourself, there's a technique called attribute listing where you split your organizations in the smallest parts possible, and you look for alternatives. Could be materials, technology, but circularity is then one of the things that you can. So which parts of the smallest part within your organization could be made circular, which is a long sheet of paper where you write all your business process with all the things you use, and you look for alternatives, and you're going to find some really interesting results. And then it's not only about, which goes back to future framing, it's not only about circularity now, but how many of those processes that you currently are adopting will be circular in 5 years' time? And if you do that, you will actually fundamentally reinvented your business model, which is why I think this accelerator is particularly interesting to existing businesses, because it helps you to reinvent your organization and develop a number of opportunities. Because something myself and Aideen keep on saying is climate change is terrible, but it's also the business opportunity currently around. It's bigger than the internet. So, woo!
Yeah. Well, we know that out of crisis comes opportunity.
There you go.
Of a gentleman called Rockefeller back in the 19th century. He did okay out of it. Folks, I'm going to wrap it up there. We're a little bit over time, but we're safe in the knowledge that this session has been recorded, and we're going to distribute the link around to anybody who registered an interest in attending in the first instance. And I think it was a half an hour well spent, and I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks very much for listening in. Thanks for your question. Ahmed, thanks very much for the panelists for your contributions. They were enlightening. We're going to do this again ourselves later on today for people who feel like coming back for second dibs, or for those of you who couldn't make it this afternoon. So we leave it at that. Thanks very much, folks, for contributing, and be careful out there.
Good day. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.